We did it! We were able to finish the 30-day video challenge. I guess 31 days if you count today. It's the end of the month. However, there were those 3 days that I did miss when we had the furnace issue and after getting sick. So I think I will do some makeup videos for those days coming up soon. Today I want to go through and answer some of the questions that y'all have asked me throughout the month. And I've got a list here to go through. I've got them organized a little bit so that we can go through kind of an order that makes sense, and we'll go from there. So the first question is from Emma C, and she asked, how did you get started or interested in all of this? And I think it's a combination of a couple of different factors. My family, we grew up yard sailing, thrifting, and I guess antique picking in a way. My dad has always been very into vintage and antiques, and my mom has always been very into decor and styling. And so I picked up a little bit from both of them. We used to take family trips in the car on the weekends to go around to yard sales and pick out things just as something to do for fun. So that really influenced my love of items and picking and thrifting and yard sailing. As for how I got into antiques themselves, when Evan and I got married in 2020, we ended up moving out of state and living in Virginia for a little while, and then coming back home into Cleveland, Tennessee. And we moved back into his grandparents' home. When we moved in with 60 years of their items and 60 years of their history here. The family wanted to go through the process of starting to distribute that and also downsize a little bit. So I kind of took on that task because I had a little bit of knowledge in it. And instead of going through an estate sale or trying to sell things off individually, we decided that we were just going to try and throw everything into an antique booth. It was almost like a storage unit, but with the potential to make us some money. So I started throwing things into the antique booth. At that point, we also needed to get some of our own furniture, some of the furniture pieces moved with the grandparents into their new space, and that left us with a few openings on furniture pieces. And we didn't really want to spend that much money, so we had one of Evan's friends actually pick us up a piece of free furniture, and I ended up redoing that to be our dresser in our bedroom. I really enjoyed doing that furniture flip. It was the first time that I'd ever worked on a piece of furniture in that way, sanding it down, painting it, and redoing it into a style that I enjoyed. And I kind of got the bug for redoing furniture. That was when the idea popped into my head for redoing furniture as a means to make a little bit of extra money to pay off my student loans. So I would go work for the Forest Service, come home, spend a couple hours working on a furniture piece, film a TikTok about it, and post that TikTok, and then do it again the next day. I started a whole TikTok series redoing furniture pieces to pay off my student loans. All of this was going on while I was still trying to run the antique booth that I had. And so I was putting the furniture pieces that I was redoing into the antique booth, selling them on Facebook Market. So that is how I ended up getting involved into an antique booth, getting involved into remodeling furniture, and also into social media. It kind of all started at one point when we moved into this house about 3 years ago. The second question is from Teresa, and she says, I hope this isn't rude to ask, but how old are you? You look 21 or 22. Thank you so much. It makes me happy to hear that. I am actually 32. I turned 32 last year, so I will be 33 this year. Looking young just kind of runs in the family, and I'm not going to complain about that. Does your husband help with the booth? Is he too shy to be on camera? I'm asking because I couldn't imagine getting everything done in my booth without my guy's help. Evan does not currently help with the booth, but that is because he has a very demanding job and it takes a lot of his time. So usually it's me asking my sister for help, or we have a really great team at Grit and Grace. So anytime that I need to get furniture moved, I have friends that really come and help me because they also work with furniture and they need help too. So it's kind of a give and take. I can go help them when they need it and they help me. Not his interest, and that's perfectly fine. He likes it because I like it. I did have another question along the same lines that asked if my husband was supportive of me, and he absolutely 100% is. At the end of this challenge, he went out of his way to buy a new camera for me, so that should be coming sometime soon. He also reads all of your comments, so I hear all the time, you didn't answer them, or you need to make sure that you reply to this person, or maybe you should make a video about this. So he reads all your comments. I also don't think I would be able to do any of this without him. The reason that I am able to pursue YouTube right now, and also an antique booth and all those other things, are because he works so hard at the job that he has. So I am very grateful for his help and his support. Does your sister sell items at a booth too, or are the items she's found for herself? It's a little bit of both. Natalie does have a booth that is in Chattanooga that she is currently in the process of moving out of. So she was in that booth for about 3 months, but she attends markets much more regularly. She does very well at markets all around the Chattanooga area, and so now she is just going to focus on markets, but then also putting things into my booth space in Grit and Grace, potentially moving into her own space at Grit and Grace as soon as something might open up. The next series of questions is all about my booth and my businesses, so we'll get into those. The first of those questions is, what are the best questions that you think you asked yourself before starting Gilded Goods? And what do you wish you knew then that you have learned now? I think when I was starting Gilded Goods, there was a lot of things that were going on to really get me into this realm. I was super uncertain of the decisions I was making, and I just wanted something that I could do for fun. I had already done the furniture flipping and was working in an antique booth, and it didn't really have the Gilded Goods name until a little bit later. And that was when my TikTok started really taking off, and I wanted a way to reach out to viewers like you guys here on YouTube, for them to be able to interact with me. And that was when I launched my online shop through Shopify to be able to sell to people. I was doing mystery boxes where I would do vintage items into a box based on the person's style, and I would ship those off. And it was just a way to connect to the people on the other side of the screen so that I could have this little community. And that's when the Gilded Goods name really got its start. I think the best question that I asked myself during that process was, what identity do I want to give my business, and who are the people that I'm going to be interacting with and reaching out to, and what did they want? I think knowing your brand values as a person who has a business, and then also understanding what your customers and clients want, is really important. You want to be able to stick true to something that you can be proud of, but you also want to make sure that you are reaching out to what other people want as well. So I think getting those two things down, a lot of the time the business way of saying that is understanding your why and knowing your who. So I think those were probably the best two things that I did sitting down at the very beginning. As far as it goes for what I wish I knew then that I know now, I really wish that I knew not to be afraid to go into a space that was higher priced just because I was starting out. I think one of the first things I did, and we'll get into this in a later question, working in the first antique booth that I worked in, was I went after that antique booth mainly because it was a price point I wasn't scared of. And it wasn't necessarily about the location or their activity on social media or the presence of the shop themselves. It was all based on whether or not I thought the price was affordable. And it really reflected in my sales long term. So I think that was the thing that I wish I hadn't been scared of, and I wish I had known, like, just don't be afraid. Make sure that where you're choosing to put your goods into really fits for what you want for your business. JW asked, where is your booth located and is it a shared space location? So my booth is located in Cleveland, Tennessee, which is about 30 minutes north of Chattanooga, and it is located inside Grit and Grace Market, which is an artisan, boutique, and vintage marketplace area that is a shared location. So there are over 100 vendors at Grit and Grace Market. All of them are local and they're crafters, artisans, some of them are boutique sellers, and then we have a good amount of vintage as well. I touched on this a little bit earlier, but Christy asked, have you always had a booth at Grit and Grace since it opened? And have you ever had a booth elsewhere? So yes, I did have a booth elsewhere when I started, and I was there for about, was it a year? Yeah. I was there for about a year before I decided to move on from there. I had done really well over a couple of months, and then there was just a very long period of not selling enough and not selling enough and not selling enough and having to pay booth rent in. So I was just losing money at that point. And I got very discouraged, not understanding what it was about my antique booth that wasn't generating money. I was putting time into putting new furniture pieces in. I was moving things around and finding really cool items. I was staging it very similarly to how I stage now, and I just wasn't making the sales that I needed to make. And I think that all boiled down to location and to the shop that I put myself in at the very beginning. So it was a very hard decision for me to take the leap to Grit and Grace. I started with Grit and Grace by going to some of their markets that they put on. We do a seasonal market usually every season. So I decided to be a vendor at some of their seasonal markets, do a little tent setup, and I sold really well. I was pretty impressed with the reaction from customers and how excited people were to find me, and I hadn't really seen that before. It got me interested in wanting a booth space with Grit and Grace. And I think it was the second market that I did with them that Brandon and Melody kind of put it in my head that maybe I should ask them about getting a booth space, because they mentioned that they really loved my style and it would be something that would fit well in their space. At that point, I was paying a booth rent of about $160 a month, which is something that I felt comfortable with. And the increase for Grit and Grace Market was pretty substantial. So I was terrified. I had gone through 4 months of not being able to make booth rent, and I didn't know if taking on an even higher booth rent was the right way to go when I wasn't even making what I needed to in the other space. But I did take the leap, and I have never looked back since, and I'm so happy I did. Along those lines, someone asked, how long have I had my antique booth? So I think going on now, this will be 2 years in Grit and Grace. So I just completed my first full year at Grit and Grace in August. So I'm on, I guess, going on 1.5 years at Grit and Grace, and then I had that other booth for a year, so 2.5 years of owning an antique booth. Melissa asked, how much time do you spend on the booth and how much money do you make a month? How much is the rent? Rent can vary between any of the spaces at Grit and Grace Market. My old rent was $225 in the smaller 8x10 space, and now I believe my new rent is around the $300 mark. It might be a little over $300 in the bigger space. So those were the 2 booth rents that I have experienced there, and then there was the $160 booth rent that I had at the other spot that I was at. As far as the amount of time that I spend in the booth, it varies greatly depending on how things have been selling. This month, I have spent much more time on the booth than I have probably in the whole previous year and a half that I've owned the booth, solely because I was doing the YouTube challenge and I really wanted to see if spending time in my booth that way would pay itself off. I would say before this, I was spending maybe 10 hours a week in the booth. And as far as payouts, again, that really varies, but I would say that my checks on the super slow months are usually like $100 of payout, but on the big months, it can be upwards of $800. So it can really vary and be very seasonal when it comes to sales. So Emma asked, as a vendor at Grit and Grace, are you obligated to work there, or is that just for you? So no, you're not obligated to work at Grit and Grace. I actually asked. I was working for Tuesday morning before they went out of business, and I was trying to find another job that I could go into, and I happened to ask Brandon and Melody if they had any availability. Beforehand, they had two very wonderful girls working the front desk, and one of them left, and so that opened up a spot for me to come in. So I was really happy to be able to work in a place that I really enjoy being in, and it has really helped me be engaged in my booth space a lot more. What do you sell your thrifted items for in your booth? This is another question that it can vary on. I usually go on the tried and true of I need to be making 3 times the amount that I've paid for the item. And so I usually ask myself when I'm out thrifting and sourcing, if I were shopping in a space, would I be willing to pay 3 times the amount for this item? And sometimes the answer is no, and I have to put the item back even though I really love it. And sometimes there are items that I will take a chance on and only get 2 times my money for it. Usually I go by that rule when it comes to smalls pieces, and it's a little bit different when it comes to furniture. There are pieces that I will pick up that also are worth way more than I'm paying for them. So I try and be as reasonable as possible. I will research the item and see an approximate value or what I think it might go for here. And then if I can find comps online or anything like that, I will usually decrease that by about 10 to 15% and put that price on the item. Jojo asked, do you ever create the items that you put into your booth, like flower arrangements, crafts, etc.? I do sometimes craft items to put in my booth. For instance, this Christmas, I made cinnamon salt dough ornaments that were pressed to put in my booth. They were inspired from Mrs. Mustard Seed's video on those, if you haven't seen that. And so I did a couple of different designs, put them on the Christmas tree, and displayed them in the booth, and I was able to sell quite a few of those. I think as far as other things go, sometimes it's a lot of thrift flips where I'm taking one thing and combining it with another that I found to create either a piece of artwork or a furniture piece or something along those lines, like taking an old door and turning it into a table. And so those are the things that I've kind of crafted myself, but I would love to get into sewing and doing some other sorts of projects to bring items into my booth that way as well. Wendy asked, what's the piece that you were thrifting so far in your business that you took your breath away, or one that was hard to part with? Anytime I have something that takes my breath away when I'm thrifting, I have a hard time parting with it. But I will show you, there's 2 items that I've held on to that I don't know that I'd want to let go. So hold on one second, let me show you. The first piece being this amazing wood piece that's got candlestick holders in it. I found this for $8 at a thrift store, and it is a wood burl, which is kind of like a deformity or a growth on a tree, and usually wood with those is extremely expensive, and so I was very happy to find this, and I don't want to let go of that piece. The other item is this mirror here in my bedroom. I found this at the Goodwill for $13, and it is a large, like, full-length mirror, and I don't want to let that one go either. I was so excited. I picked it up and immediately ran to the front to check out, and I am in love with that piece. I'm sure there are plenty of other pieces that I've been super excited to grab when I've seen them and put them in the booth and sold them. I can't think of anything else right now, but you come across some really beautiful pieces when you go to auctions or thrift or anything like that. So I just get excited anytime I find anything cool. Someone asked, have you ever experienced theft or shoplifting, and how do you counteract it? I don't think I've ever personally out of my booth experienced any kind of shoplifting or theft, but I know other booth owners who have had that happen. As far as Grit and Grace Market goes, we pay attention to who comes into the door. We make sure to greet people. We do rounds around the market every hour, so someone will take a walk around, see if there's anything out of place, check on things, as well as we have cameras and signs posted that you are on camera in a lot of different locations. Carrie asks, how do we purchase items from you online? I can't seem to find your website. My website is currently under construction right now. I had a Shopify website that I was selling my Gilded Goods items on, and I decided I wanted to switch over to a different website host. So I am currently in the process of building that so that I have my vintage rentals area and my shop area kind of separated. I'm hoping to get that done sometime this month and get it up and running. So I will let y'all know whenever that's ready. Sabrina asked, how many different businesses do you have? Do you feel like they're somewhat seasonal? So when one is slow, is another one busy? I would say for myself, I only really have one business, and that's antiques and vintage, but I utilize that business in different aspects. So I have my Gilded Goods vintage, which is my antique booth and usually my online sales, and that's all just buying and selling vintage. Then I have my vintage rentals, and that just started from personal collections that I have then lent out to other people and evolved from there. I would technically say that both of those fall under the Gilded Goods umbrella. As far as the sustainability and upstream stuff goes, that's its own separate entity, but that's more of a passion project at the moment. I have a very big passion for the sustainability aspect of things. I wanted to be able to have product available to me and then offer it to other people. So that right now is in its little infancy and baby steps, and I'm hoping that at some point it will take off. The goal is to get it its own space at some point, and that way I have Gilded Goods in a booth and then maybe the upstream sustainability shop in its own space somewhere else. But as of right now, it is just hosted by Gilded Goods. It's got its own little tiny shelf, and it'll stay there for a little bit. Talking about rentals, someone asked, how does your rental enterprise work? How do you establish your renting fees? And do you deliver or do they pick up from your place? A little bit of both on that end, but as far as how do the rentals work, I usually have people contact me if they've heard from word of mouth that, hey, I'm hosting such and such event. I heard that you have items I might be able to use. Here's the inspiration that I'm looking for. So then I will talk back and forth with that person about exactly what kind of items they're needing, the look of the event that they're trying to host, any color schemes, and then I will send them pictures of the options that I have available that might work for them. I will also send them the pricing for those items so that they can gauge exactly how much they want to spend and where they want to spend their money in their budget. And then we build kind of their little collection from there. As far as how to price the items, whenever I've picked something up, my goal is to always make my money back by the second rental. This isn't always possible. Sometimes I find things that are a little bit higher priced. Sometimes I find things that are a little bit lower priced. But I do have a good amount of research from people down in Atlanta, Washington State. I looked at a lot of other vintage rental businesses to see what they ask for their items, and then I wanted to work on it from there. So I try and rent the item for about half of what I paid for it. That way, within 2 rentals, the item's paid for, and everything from there becomes profit, except for the fact that you have your running expenses that you need to take out of that. For delivery and pickup, I do offer delivery. There is an additional charge if someone wants me to deliver the items for them, but I know a lot of the times if they have an event going on, they don't have the ability to come pick it up and then bring it back and whatnot. So I do offer that, again, just for an additional fee. But for the most part, the events that I have done, people have chosen to pick it up themselves. The rest of the questions are based around sourcing my items. And so Robin and Lisa both asked, do you shop yard sales or flea markets? I do very rarely. I tried to do yard sales for a while when I was first doing my booth, when I had it in the other antique booth location. However, I very quickly realized that it was just taking too much time and I wasn't walking away with enough product for the amount of time that I was investing into it.
Hello.
How rude. I was racing the light and went to go check on my footage after getting through all of the rest of the questions, only to realize that my camera had died way far back. So now I have to redo all these questions. Trying to do the best lighting situation I can with what we have available. I think where we left off was asking about flea markets and yard sales and how often I utilize those, or if I utilize those during the summer. I quickly realized that it wasn't worth my time or the gas for driving around between a bunch of different places, not to be guaranteed a fair amount of inventory. I really enjoy doing it for fun, but it's definitely not where I source from often. I will usually source from auctions, estate sales, thrift stores, and occasionally I will go to the much larger displays of the flea market yard sale combinations, like the 411 yard sale or the really big yard sales that take up a lot of different space down a certain highway. Leah asked, how do you track your inventory and do you give yourself a budget on sourcing for inventory? I'm embarrassed to say that I don't track my inventory very well. At the very beginning, I did use a spreadsheet to track the items, how much I bought them for, when I bought them, how long it took to sell them, what I was able to sell them for, if I had to put them on sale, yada, yada, yada. And I just didn't keep up with it. It ended up being a waste of the amount of time it took for me to do that. So now instead, I just have a rough idea of the items that I've bought and the collections I have in my mind. And then I just let my purchases dictate how much I've spent in expenses. So I know, for instance, that when I'm spending at a thrift store, pretty much all of it is inventory. There are occasions where I will mark items because I know that they were personal purchases for myself. But for the most part, if I've spent money at an estate sale, at an auction, at a thrift store, I know just to count that purchase number in my expenses category. As far as inventory goes and my budgeting for inventory, I absolutely set a budget for my inventory. I try and keep every thrifting trip under $100 for the most part, and I try and spend less than $200 worth in inventory every month. And that is a very, very low budget when it comes to sourcing. That is small. And it's not always doable. I think, like any vendor, I give myself a little leeway when it comes to sourcing, just because you never know what you're going to come across. So if I'm out sourcing and I see the perfect piece that I need and it's outside of my budget, I always plan on going a little bit over the goal that I set for myself during that shopping trip. But for the most part, I do stick to the under $100 for a thrift trip. I would say the average cost of a thrifting day or an inventory day is usually going to be about $30 to $50 whenever I go out. Sometimes it's a little bit more, sometimes it's a little bit less. It really just depends on how the day is turning out. Emma asks, have you ever been to a Goodwill bins, or is there too much new stuff? I have only ever been to the bins one time in Chattanooga, and Natalie and I decided we won't ever go back. I don't think this is the case for all bins though. I think it's just Chattanooga bins. There was not enough good inventory to worry about going through it. The prices are great. Paying by the pound for items is so much nicer, and I definitely see why people who source mainly vintage clothing would go that route. But as far as the decor inventory, it just was not a great selection whenever we went through the bins in Chattanooga. I think it would be different if we went down to like Atlanta or Knoxville or some of the bigger cities, and I would encourage you to go check them out if you are around some of the bigger city areas. But around here, it was not worth it for us. There's a similar question to this. Did you purchase your clothes by pound? If not, by each item? And how do you determine the price to charge for your clothes? So no, I did not pay per pound. I paid per individual items. And as far as pricing goes, I still try and stick to that 3 times rule. This doesn't always apply because there is a market price for certain items. So like a really nice vintage cable knit sweater that is made from natural materials is going to be much higher priced than a newer item made from synthetic materials. And I will price according to kind of already established guidelines for vintage clothes, but I do still try and stick to that 3 times rule whenever I'm outsourcing. Monica said, I was curious about whether you felt your dresser flip was profitable in the end given the time and materials you put into it. I recently got a dresser with similar surface damage at an auction, and it was so much work, I kept making mistakes. It's currently sitting in the basement. Would you do it again? I'm not sure I'm cut out for furniture restoration. Monica, I would say don't give up. In the very beginning of furniture flipping and furniture work, I made a lot of mistakes, and it cost me a lot of time and a lot of money. But I think that's just part of the learning process, and as you get more efficient and you learn more techniques, it becomes easier and easier to do those kinds of makeovers and flips without as much hassle or grief. And it is really discouraging when you're starting out and you feel like you made it worse than it actually was. I would suggest you watch this Nightstands from Heck video about the nightstands that literally drove me crazy. I was so frustrated with them. But I think from those experiences, you learn what to look out for in furniture, how much time you actually want to spend working on a piece and whether it would be worth it for you. And you learn the tips and tricks of the trade as you go through the process. It is frustrating to go through that failure process, but I think it does make you better in the long run. As far as whether it's profitable or not, I do think furniture is profitable. Maybe not so much in my area, but I still do make a profit. So for instance, on that dresser that I sold, I bought it for $100 in an auction. I'd say it was about $30 in material costs for me, so $130 there, and about 4 hours of work on my part. So in total, not a lot of time put into a restoration like that. Of course, I could have spent a little less time had I not been messing around the first day and just experimenting on it. But for the 4 hours of time I put into that, instead of gauging my furniture flips on a profit, I base it on a how much I can pay myself per hour range. So sometimes I can pay myself $50 per hour for the amount of time minus the expense that I had in it. Sometimes I only pay myself $20 per hour for time, and sometimes I only pay myself $10 per hour per time. So it can be very dependent on the intricacy level of the piece and what you're doing to it, and it takes a little trial and error to learn what you can and can't charge for things. In my area, I did charge $350 for that. So the $220 is my payout for the 4 hours of time that I put into it minus the expenses. And I would say that is a pretty good profit margin or a pretty good amount of money for the time that I had into it. If I had been in another market towards a bigger city, I would be able to charge $500 for a mid-century modern piece like that. And so I would say that if you are in an area where you are closer to a bigger city, there's definitely much more profit margin, or you can pay yourself much more for the time that you have into pieces. So don't give up, keep trying. But if you're not enjoying the process, it's okay if it's not for you. I had another question today asking me how I'm doing on my student loan journey. And as much as I would like to say that I'm like so close to paying them off, it's just a process. I've been paying the monthly payments on them, trying to throw a little bit extra here and there. And really, I'm only in the like $72,000 range still, which is a lot of money. So it's just a slow process. When interest keeps building on them, I try and pay as much as I possibly can. But I would love to see that be knocked down faster and faster as I work on my business. The last question is specifically asking about the challenge itself, and it's from Lisa. She asks, how much did your channel grow while you were posting every day during the challenge? And did you get a big bump of new subscribers after the shout out from Amanda's Mercantile? When I started the challenge, I think I was somewhere around the 300 subscriber mark. So I was under 500 subscribers. And my goal was to just hit the 1,000 subscriber mark that I wanted to hit. I was able to hit that 1,000 subscribers myself. So it was an increase of somewhere between 500 to 700 subscribers, because I can't quite remember where I started, but it was somewhere in that range. And that was what I was able to do myself, just posting daily. As far as the shout out from Amanda's Mercantile goes, it blew that number out of the water. I think in the 24 hours after her video, I gained 1,000 subscribers. So she essentially doubled the amount of subscribers I had. I was right at 1,300, I think, when she did her shout out. And at this moment today, I have hit 2,500 subscribers. So the vast majority of my new subscribers were from that shout out from Amanda, and I cannot thank her enough. She was so kind and reached out to me very close to the beginning of my challenge, telling me that she was following along and she couldn't wait to see what I did, telling me that it was definitely going to be hard work, but she thought that I could do it and it would really push my boundaries. So I was very encouraged to keep going, just knowing that she was watching. And then she would check in every couple of days or so. How's it going? How's your subscriber count now? Were you able to monetize your channel yet? And do you know how sneaky she was? So she had it, I think, in her mind this whole time that she was gonna wait until I got my channel monetized before she did that shout out. So that shout out that she did, she waited to make sure that my channel was monetized before she put it out. That was some mastermind schemery going on in that brain of hers, and it's the nicest thing in the world. It was so sweet and very thoughtful of her to do that, and it has really had a big impact on the ending of the challenge. As far as the future goes for the rest of this year and my channel, I am hoping to post fairly consistently. My goal is to do at least 2 videos a week. If it happens that that's just a lot and I need to bump it down to 1 video a week, I will try and do that. But I do want to be fairly regular and consistent with my posting. There's going to be a lot of fun projects coming up. I'm wanting to show you all work on my house as I go through the process of putting my own style onto my house. There's a lot of projects with furniture pieces. There's always more thrifting and work to do in the antique booth, and also work in the vintage wedding rentals realm. So I'm hoping that I can bring you all along for all of the different adventures surrounding vintage, antiques, and decor. And I am so excited to have you here for that journey. Thank you all for watching, liking, subscribing, commenting, and just being involved in this community here. I am so thankful for you all being here, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow.